with me is
Edward,
Edward, Nemo, whatever you want to call him. You've probably heard him on the podcast that we do for the hockey. You've probably also seen him in our little short film that we did while we've been in quarantine. The check-in that we did for the Quarantine Film Festival. He was Mr. Anderson in that. He had a lot of fun in that. He'll tell you he didn't, but
no, I had. I'm the talent.
But he's actually not one of our theater geeky film student friends like Corey and Zeke, who are professional actors and everything like that. He is actually a history major from school. So he's joining us today on the 4th of July episode of this, where we're going to be reviewing The Patriot. And he's going to give us a little... America, yeah. He's going to be giving us a little bit of the historical background of the movie and how actually accurate The Patriot is. So let's go ahead and just give some quick plot to this real fast. In case you haven't seen The Patriot, it's incredibly, what is it, 2000, 2001 when this movie came out?
Yes.
Somewhere around there. I remember I wasn't quite old enough to see it yet because it was an R-rated movie, so I had to have my parents take me to go see it. Does it really deserve an R rating? That's probably up for debate.
Apparently there's only one thing that gives it that.
Yeah. But first, here's a little bit of plot in case you haven't seen it. So Mel Gibson is our main character here. Mel is a southern, South Carolina farmer, we'll call it, more or less is what he is. He happens to work this farm. He is a veteran of the French and Indian War, and he is trying to live his life. And when the Revolutionary War breaks out, he gets called to Charleston, South Carolina for the vote if South Carolina wants to break away from Britain and begin the revolution as part of the colonies. And he, kind of says, no, I don't want to cast a vote in that. I don't want to be a part of this whole thing. His sons go off to war, and one of his sons go off to war. Gabriel goes off to war. His other son dies in a war crime, pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah. His other son dies on the farm while he's taking care of both British and American soldiers. And during this whole course of the whole thing, he goes on and he fights some of these major battles as kind of a insurgent, more or less just
a guerrilla
warfare type fighter in South Carolina, and he leads this group of militia throughout the war all the way to Yorktown, and thus, if you know American history and why we celebrate July 4th, you know how the story ends, basically. So that's a little down and dirty. We'll get into some of the more details here in a minute. But Ed, lead us off here. This movie, how historically accurate is it?
I mean, pretty much with any Hollywood production, it's got a lot of good points. It's got some bad. It's got some very bad, like the war crime we were talking about.
So let's start there. So let's start kind of at the beginning of this movie. So we talked about the South Carolina, as everybody's meeting in Charleston, and is Charlestown, I guess is how it's referred to in the movie, which later became Charleston, South Carolina. But they're all meeting up. Southern eyes. But they all meet up there and they're voting. Was that pretty common, or was it delegates who?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so if you notice, Benjamin goes. The reason is he's a white landowner.
I figured as much.
So he's probably about as close to delegates as they have.
Fair enough.
That was a very common. That was pretty much how voters were decided. If you own land.
Pretty much. Makes sense. So, there's also the other character, I can't think of his name right now, but the one who is from South Carolina who joins the British forces. Mm-hmm. In the South, it was a little bit more common for them to be a little bit more siding with the British, wasn't it, than the North?
Yes. The South was definitely more... If they didn't side with the British, they wanted to stay out of it. The Southern colonies really were not pro-war. They at the least wanted to stay out of the fight.
That makes total sense, and why we have the character who joins the British and so on and so forth over there.
Yeah, so most of your rebellion was Boston. Big shock. We've all heard the stories from Boston and the Revolutionary War. That was usually where you'd see the rebellion. But yeah, the further south you went, they would prefer to stay out of it.
Yeah, a little more loyalist background and everything. So, okay, so we got that kind of perspective there. So, Benjamin Martin is, of course, a fictional character. So, like, if you look up Benjamin Martin and you try to get, like, any historical context on this, you're not going to find Mel Gibson's character.
Spoiler, he doesn't exist.
Spoiler, he doesn't exist. He's not a real person. But people that he was based off of did. So, you want to explain a little bit of who those people are?
So, he's actually based on several people. The biggest one, the most closely, I would say.
Prominent, yeah.
Yeah, is Francis Marion, a.k.a. the Swamp Fox. And the reason I say it's probably the most closely related is because he did exactly what Mel Gibson does in this. He hides in the woods, ambushes the British, and then retreats to the swamp where the British wouldn't go find him. Either because they wouldn't go in the swamp, or because they knew that was his territory, and they knew that they would get massacred if they did. So, for whatever reason, or either of those two reasons, combination, they did not chase him into the swamp.
Fair enough. And I know that we studied a little bit of that when we went through OCS together. Mm-hmm. So when we were going through that and we studied a little bit of that period of history, the Swamp Fox ended up winning a lot of hearts and minds kind of throughout the South. But, it wasn't as bad, as you mentioned the war crimes earlier, as this movie depicts with the British colonel in this.
Yeah, and I read up on that. That is one of the complaints about the movie, is that it paints the British to be the evil empire. I mean, for lack of a better word.
What of the rebel wounded? Kill them.
I mean, we can get into a debate about if the Brits were the
Well, I mean, I'm not. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. But it paints them as all they're doing is going through raping, plundering, and pillaging. And honestly, that is more of just a movie device to kind of speed along this guy who's, I don't want to fight to, now I must fight.
Yeah, it gives it a little bit of character push through the whole thing, but it wasn't that bad. It wasn't
no,
that
not
bad
at all.
in reality.
Especially throughout the movie, you hear the British officers talk about the honor, fighting with integrity, and that was actually a very big thing at the time. Honestly, Mel Gibson's character was not fighting with honor, as it's discussed in the movie, but that was very real. That did happen a lot. A lot of British forces would fight that, a lot of American forces would fight that way because they knew there was no way they could win in battles like this, actually. Just line against the British. So that was very common. That was also, as he mentions, he's a veteran of the French and Indian Wars. A lot of those tactics, those militia tactics, those guerrilla tactics, are learned from fighting the Indians on the frontier in the French and Indian War. That's where they picked up those tactics.
Okay.
That's kind of the cool connection with the hatchet here. It's how he learned to fight with a hatchet like that. He mimicked the Indians.
Okay. So there's a lot of battles depicted in this movie. I think we went over a little bit. What are the main ones that are depicted? Obviously Yorktown, because it's just blatantly said in there. Yorktown at the end of the movie, which is like a 5-second snippet of Yorktown. But what are some of the battles that were actually depicted and more or less what they were supposed to be?
Yeah, I can't remember all the names that are in there, but most of them, I think a lot of them in here are just kind of representations.
I know Cowpens was one of the ones that when we were doing a little bit of research that we came across was supposed to be one of them.
Yeah.
So, but I think it was a year off of when it actually happened and a few other things too.
Yeah, and I mean, again, that just happens in movies. You gotta
take it as it comes.
Yeah. I mean, you're trying to tell the story. You can't always be completely accurate. I get that. I know they talk about the Battle of Fort Wilderness. That didn't happen. There
were multiple Fort Wildernesses.
Well, that was kind of a combination of a lot of incidents during the French and Indian War. So that didn't itself happen. Kind of like Mel Gibson's character, it's a combination of events that they bring together to make one.
Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
So if you were to give this thing a history class grade, if you were going to call this how accurate, what grade would you give this movie on historical context, historical reality of the whole thing? What would you say?
Overall, it's pretty good. I mean, I think they do a pretty good job overall. Obviously, like I said, there's only so much you can do to keep it accurate and keep it. I think it's a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, it's a 2-hour movie.
So,
It's an epic, which
yeah.
it's like the first Revolutionary War epic that we really get.
Yeah,
and it's made
we
by
tried to look
directed
them
by
up,
Foreigner.
and
Yeah.
there was this, and then there was like the John Adams HBO series, and that was about it. Most of the Revolutionary War movies, there were not a lot.
You don't hear a lot of them. Yeah, I know there's a
No.
musical called 1776, but we want to get to that. Starring Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World
Oh, good.
as John Adams.
That's beautiful.
That's why it's actually called John Adams High School.
That's really beautiful.
I'm surprised you didn't know that.
I did not know that. That is great.
I have come to the conclusion that one useless man is called a disgrace, that 2 are called a law firm, and that 3 or more become a Congress. And by God, I have had this Congress. For 10 years, King George and his parliament have gull-cullied and diddled these colonies with their illegal taxes, Stamp Acts, Townsend Acts, Sugar Acts, Tea Acts. And when we dared stand up like men, they have stopped our trade, seized our ships, blockaded our ports, burned our towns, and spilled our blood. And still, this Congress refuses to grant any of my proposals on independence, even so much as the courtesy of open debate. Good God, what in hell are you waiting for? Thomas, for God's sake, listen to me.
Okay, so that's the historical part of the film. It's fairly accurate, not the most accurate thing in the world, but it's accurate enough. So, it's accurate enough to be enjoyable.
It does enough, you get the point.
It does enough to get the point.
War is bloody. War is hell, especially in this day when basically the only medicine was amputate it.
Yeah, they didn't even have aspirin yet back then, so.
No, you bit leather.
You bit leather, yeah.
You bit leather while they chomp down.
So what would you say? Probably like a B-, C+ kind of movie?
In that range.
Okay, so yeah, no, a competent history student wrote this. So, so let's...
I would have taken those grades in college.
Just say, C's get degrees, son.
If I had turned this in as a paper, I would have been happy.
All right, so let's get into some of the film stuff and what I studied in college. So, there's a couple of those things. So, first and foremost, one of the things that we were saying, I was saying to you while we were watching is that I feel like a lot of the shots in this thing feel like a John Trumbull painting, which you mentioned his paintings were made more for, capturing the American spirit.
Yes.
So, he's got some great paintings out there, and I think most famously is probably the signing of the Declaration of Independence, where you've got, I think it's George Washington, and, everyone's around, and da-da-da-da-da, which is the most inaccurate painting in the world, by the way, if you actually know anything about the history, because they were never in the same room at the exact same time. Never happened. That was one of the things I was reading about that, how much of a lie that painting is. But it's probably his most well-known.
Are you saying that painting is propaganda?
Yeah, are you saying, No, the whole thing is a piece of propaganda at the end of the day. But the very classical design, the very beautiful look of the whole thing, it's very much there, and I feel like this movie has that prominent design in it, where it's the very, landscape paintings, and, Trumbull's paintings all had depth in it. I feel like all these shots have a ton of depth. You can see forever into them, and really be embraced in the world. Another thing I do like about the shots in this is that the use of color. When you think about it, you as a non-film student, how much color do you think you see in this entire thing? Just color, not even just live color, but the saturation levels of the color. How deep, how, prominent does it feel? Does it feel bright? Does it feel cold? How does it feel to you?
I think it feels bright.
Yeah, and that's exactly what
looking at, the red coats, they are very red.
Yeah. And the costuming was done, by the way, with help through the Smithsonian. So I thought that
sounds right.
Yeah. So the historically accurate costuming. What do you know?
Yeah. Oh look, they're on Forrest Gump's porch.
That's another thing is that so with this, the house that Aunt Charlotte lives at is actually the same house from Forrest Gump. I told you that, and we're just we're going to go see Sally Field and Forrest Gump. So.
I love that scene now.
Oh my gosh, it's just perfect. So we commented on this a little while ago. The fact that the stuff that happens within the film with like Mel Gibson and his sons being killed throughout the course of the war. There's a lot of people are very critical that this film is more like a story of revenge than patriotism.
Yeah,
yeah.
I read that and I thought it was great.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, but I think because of the devices that you have to use to tell a story, I think the choices aren't the best. But like narrative-wise, I do think it works.
Yeah,
like I think you have to give Mel Gibson's character a journey and a reason to become a patriot. And him hating the British is a pretty good reason to become a patriot of a new nation or a new cause kind of attitude.
I read something that said it shouldn't be called the Patriot; it should be called the Family Man. Because none of his motives are actually patriotic. He's just like, man, I really want to kill the guy who shot my son.
I mean, it's fair. That is a totally fair response. You're totally welcome to say that.
Well, and thinking about it too, I mean, that is a common motivation in war. You hurt my family, now you're the enemy.
Yeah.
You know, you hurt me somehow, now you're the enemy.
Now you're the bad guy.
I mean, realistically, it's not a bad plot.
Yeah.
Idea.
I agree. I agree. But like otherwise, other than that, the Patriot side of it, Mel Gibson's character actually does a lot of development throughout the course of this entire thing. So there's actually a lot happening with his performance. Mel starts out with this I don't want to go to war thing, and he's overprotective of his sons. And his sons are willing to go out and fight for the cause of liberty and everything like that. They're very willing to do that. And I think the fact that his sons are willing to do that gives Mel Gibson motivation when they die, that my son shall not die in vain, and things like that. And he becomes part of the cause more because he believes in what his sons. And he even goes through a piece of that where after Gabriel dies, he's like, all's lost kind of moment. When he's sitting in the tent, and it's kind of reflective almost, and it's like, which way is he going to choose? Is it more important to live out his son's legacy, or is it more important to mourn your sons? So like, you know, I think that shows some of the character growth that Mel Gibson's character. Mel Gibson is doing an outstanding performance. I know that not everybody loves Mel Gibson, but like Mel Gibson's performance in this is really, really good, and like I think it's the best part of the movie is Mel Gibson's performance.
Oh yeah.
No, I didn't expect you would. That Gates is a damn fool. He spent too many years in the British Army. Going muzzle to muzzle with redcoats in open field. It's madness.
So, just a couple more little tidbits, notes here that we can kind of gather. We were talking about the British colonel. His name is Tavington. Personally, I think he is the perfect villain. I don't think he's historically accurate, but I think if you're going to have a serious motivating force in this entire thing, I think Tavington, it just brings it home. Like he is evil incarnate, just about, and I think that's a great way to have him exist in this film, in this world, and it gives a lot of push to Mel Gibson, and I like that.
Well, and when I say that it's not accurate, I mean obviously everyone hears the stories, everyone knows there are atrocities that happen in war. So was his character, could there have been a Lucius Malfoy running around?
I mean, you're totally right. Yeah, could there have been a Lucius Malfoy running around? Yeah, no, Tavington does great.
I mean, I love that actor too. But yeah, I mean that. There's nothing to say that wasn't happening on a small scale. The movie just makes it seem like it was happening
on a much larger scale, and like it was under the direction of General Cornwallis. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know the historical side of that, but like I said, for a character-driven thing, you have a very clear bad guy in here, and it's that British colonel who is just obviously the bad guy.
If I do this, you and I both know that I can never return to England with honor. What, I wonder, is to become of me?
Oh, archetypes. An ode to archetypes. How I learned so much about you because of Star Wars. Okay, and my final little point here. One of the things I do appreciate this movie from a storytelling perspective is that I never feel like there is a seed unsown here. There's never a loose end in the story, and the reason I bring that up is that there's different characters. I wrote it down here in my notes. But take, for instance, the plot between Dan Scott and Oakham, or the
Oh.
Yeah, the African American. Yeah, the guy who his master signs him up to fight for him and everything like that. Dan Scott's character starts out very like, what are you going to do with freedom when they get the whole note? And at the end of it, Dan Scott's character has learned and is like appreciates this man that he's been signing. Yeah, is it a trope? It's a little bit of a trope, but it's a story that never gets like. And there's moments throughout the film where Ockham saves Dan Scott. And, like, there's other moments throughout this entire thing where they start bonding and talking about things. And the side plots throughout this entire movie never get left alone.
No.
Like, they always come back in some way. So, like, when they start something in this film, the writing is returns back to it and it finds an opportunity. You're grinning. What are you thinking here?
Well, I was thinking about the one guy's kid, and he's like, I want to kill me some redcoats. And I made the comment, well, you'll get your chance. You got War of 1812. And then I go, ooh, no, you don't.
No, you don't.
You don't get that chance.
Oh.
I feel really bad. That does not go in the final cut.
Oh, it might. It might make it there.
But I mean, I guess there again, that's making your point.
Yeah, because like what's he doing at the end of it? Like he's laying there on the ground and he's holding the pistol. Like he was totally willing to go fight those redcoats. It's a very dark, plot, even with this little kid.
Well, and I'm saying like what you're talking about there. It's not leaving that side story
unsewn.
Open.
Yeah, it's never like you don't start something and don't finish it in this movie. Everything once it gets started, it stays consistent. Yeah. So, final thoughts on this movie. Do you recommend The Patriot to people?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I love this movie.
So do you recommend it because it's like the only Revolutionary War film that's really prominent, or do you think of it like it's a really good film?
I just really like it. I mean, if you're wanting a Revolutionary War film, I guess this is it.
I mean, pretty much. Like this is
There's
it.
Not a lot. I mean, there's some options apparently, but this is
the big one, and that everyone talks about, like when they think about the Revolutionary War. I like it. I think the rating on Rotten Tomatoes, where they give it like a 60%, like just at the fresh line, is a little unfair. I think it's a little bit better than that because I think the writing is halfway decent. Because just from the storytelling part of it, the dialogue may suck at times, but like for the most part, the storytelling is pretty accurate. The shots are gorgeous. It's never a boring film. I never think the entire thing. I know that a lot of people say it looks like it's more of a comic book than it is an actual like movie. But like at the same time, like I think this movie is actually pretty complete and it's pretty good. I say it deserves a 70 on Rotten Tomatoes, but like the overall consensus is a 60. So, I mean, and yeah, that's so. I mean, like I think it's a little underhyped.
I mean, I'd say it deserves at least a 76.
A 1776, if you will.
Indeed.
I think that's where we're gonna wrap this review up.
America.
Happy 4th of July, everybody.
Good times.